Whose Lamborghini is this? Don't play games with me.
It's mine, officer. I've already shown you my license and registration.
That paperwork doesn't mean you own this. Be honest, where did you really get the money?
I don't need to explain myself beyond what the law requires.
Last chance. You either consent to a full search right now, or I escalate this stop call back and put you in cuffs on the sides of this highway.
The lights came on without warning. Red, blue, red, blue, strobing hard against the Georgia afternoon sky like a pulse looking for a heartbeat to match. Desmond Arledge's eyes moved to the rearview mirror first, then to the side mirror, then to his own hands, steady on the wheel of the red Lamborghini Urus, 10 and 2, exactly where they were supposed to be. He didn't flinch, didn't curse, didn't reach for his phone. He just eased off the gas, signaled right, clean to deliberate, and pulled onto the gravel shoulder of I-285 like a man who had done this calculation before. Because he had. The patrol car rolled in tight behind him. Too tight. The kind of close that says, I already decided something before a single word gets spoken. Dominic cut the engine, placed both hands on top of the steering wheel where they could be seen clearly through the windshield. Then he waited. Outside, the afternoon sun pressed down on the Atlanta asphalt. The heat shimmered off the hood of the Urus in slow waves. Cars blurred past on the highway. Commuters, families, 18-wheelers, none of them stopping, none of them looking long enough to understand what was beginning on that shoulder of road. The officer's door opened. Boots hit gravel. Slow steps, measured. The kind of walk that is itself a statement. Dominic watched him in the side mirror without turning his head. Mid-40s. Broad shoulders squared like he was walking into something he'd already won. One hand resting near his belt. Not reaching, just reminding. Officer Preston Hale reached the driver's window and stopped. He didn't lean in. He stood straight, looking down. The geometry of the moment arranged exactly the way he wanted it. The silence stretched 3 full seconds before he spoke. License and registration. Not good afternoon. Not, do you know why I stopped you? Like not even the thin courtesy of eye contact held a beat too long. Just those 3 words. Flat. Certain. Already in charge. Dominic turned his head slowly and looked up at the officer. His expression held nothing that could be used against him. No anger. No performance of innocence. Just a calm so complete it seemed almost architectural. Like something built to last. Of course, Dominic said. His voice was low, unhurried, and the voice of a man who had somewhere to be and was in no danger of forgetting it. He reached into the center console with one hand, deliberate and visible, and produced his license and the vehicle registration. He held them out through the window. Hale took them without looking at him. He studied the documents for longer than necessary. His jaw moved slightly, not chewing, just working something over. His eyes flicked to the plates, to the VIN visible at the base of the windshield. Get back to the license. Then he looked up. This your vehicle, sir? Dominic held his gaze. It is. Where are you headed today? A beat. Downtown Atlanta, Dominic said. Can I ask what I was stopped for? Hale's chin came up slightly. Improper lane transition back there on the merge. Nothing in Dominic's face moved. Because he knew, the way a man knows his own heartbeat, that his lane change had been clean, fully compliant, signaled, spaced, smooth. He'd been precise about it, and he was always precise. I see, Dominic said. That was all. Hale tapped the documents against his palm twice. I'm going to run these. Sit tight. He turned and walked back toward the cruiser. Dominic returned both hands to the wheel. His eyes moved to the rearview mirror again and stayed there. He watched Hale reach the cruiser but not get in. The officer stood outside the driver's door, one hand braced on the roof, looking back at the Urus. 30 seconds passed. A full minute. Hale was not running the license. He was thinking. Dominic noticed something else. The body cam clipped to Hale's chest. Its small red recording light was on. Dominic adjusted his posture almost imperceptibly. Back straight, both hands visible, voice controlled. Whatever this was going to become, it would be on record. Then, in Dominic's side mirror, a second set of headlights appeared on the shoulder, coming in slow and deliberate from a quarter-mile back. Back up. Nobody called for backup on an improper lane change. Dominic exhaled once through his nose. Long. Quiet. He had not broken a single law. He had not raised his voice. He had not given this officer one thing, not one molecule of behavior that could justify what was already forming on this Georgia roadside. And yet, here they were. Hale walked back to the window. He handed the documents back without comment, and then looked down at Dominic with something behind his eyes that wasn't quite authority and wasn't quite question. It was a test. "Mr. Arledge," Hale said slowly, tasting the name like he was deciding what to do with it. "Do you have any weapons, drugs, or illegal contraband in this vehicle?" "No," Dominic said. "Mind if I take a look inside?" Dominic met his gaze without blinking. "I do mind," he said. "I don't consent to a search." The words were clean, precise, legal, delivered without edge or apology, the way you say something that simply happens to be true. Hale's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind it, something that looked a lot like a decision being made. "Step out of the vehicle," Hale said. Desmond Arledge opened the door of the Urus and stepped out. He did it the way he did everything, without rush, without theater, and both hands visible before his feet hit the gravel. He stood at full height, 6'2", broad across the shoulders, dressed in a clean navy quarter-zip and dark slacks. And he looked at Officer Hale with the patience of a man who understood that patience was its own kind of power. He said nothing. Hale gestured toward the front of the vehicle with 2 fingers. "Move to the hood." Dominic walked there, stood facing the highway, with his hands loose at his sides. The backup cruiser rolled to a stop 20 feet behind the Urus. A second officer, younger, quieter, climbed out and hung back near the rear bumper. He didn't speak. He just watched. And while Hale moved back toward his cruiser, this time actually running the documents, something important happened that Hale could not have known and could not have seen. The red Lamborghini Urus sitting on the shoulder of Officer E-285 belonged to a man who, 14 days earlier, had signed the final paperwork accepting appointment to the highest law enforcement position in the city of Atlanta. Dominic Kenyatta Arledge, incoming Chief of Police. The public announcement had been drafted. The press conference was scheduled. The formal swearing-in ceremony was 9 days out. None of it had gone public yet. The mayor's office had asked for a communication blackout until the official date. Clean rollout, no leaks, no disruptions. So as far as Officer Preston Hale knew, the man standing at the hood of that red Lamborghini was nobody he needed to be careful around. That assumption would become the most consequential mistake of his career. Dominic had spent 22 years building toward that appointment in ways that most people in the department didn't fully understand, because he had never once led with his resume in a room. He'd worked his way through patrol, investigations, and community oversight with the kind of quiet consistency that doesn't make headlines. It just makes records, citations, commendations, solved cases, programs that actually held, neighborhoods that actually trusted the badge that showed up in them. He had led the state-level use of force transition committee that rewrote de-escalation protocol for 11 jurisdictions. He had testified before the state legislature on police accountability infrastructure twice. And he had turned down a federal position because he believed the work that mattered most was local, specific, connected to real streets and real faces and real history. And on this particular Tuesday afternoon, he had chosen to drive himself to a meeting at City Hall because that was something he did intentionally, deliberately. He did not ride in department vehicles unless officially required. He did not travel with escorts or security. He drove himself, in his own car, on public roads, so like every other private citizen in Atlanta, because he believed that a man in his position had to understand what it felt like to move through this city without the armor of the badge. Today, standing at the hood of his own vehicle on a Georgia highway shoulder, he understood it completely. He heard Hale's boots on gravel again, heard the crackle of the patrol radio, heard the younger officer shift his weight near the bumper. He looked at the passing cars on I-285, on an elderly woman in a silver sedan, a young couple in a pickup, a delivery truck. None of them knew. None of them stopped. He thought about the body cam, about the dash cam on Hale's cruiser, about every word already on record. Dominic was not naive. He had seen this pattern before, from the other side of the table in oversight reports, in the clinical language of documented discretionary stops that added up to something unmistakable when you laid them end to end. When he had read files like this one, reviewed officers like this one, and he had made a decision somewhere in the first 90 seconds of this stop that he would not interrupt it. He would not announce himself. He would not reach for the one piece of information that would end this scene immediately. He would let it continue, because everything that happened here, every question, every order, every second of this detention, was going to matter. He adjusted his posture slightly again as Hale approached. Shoulders level, expression neutral, back straight. Both hands where the camera could see them. He had already clocked the angle of the body cam. He knew exactly what it was capturing. Hale stopped beside him and handed back the documents. Clean record. No warrants. Registered owner confirmed. Mr. Arledge, Hale said. His tone had shifted. Not softer, just recalculated. I'm going to need you to wait here a few more minutes. Dominic looked at him. Am I being detained? A pause. You are, Hale said. Dominic nodded once. Slow. He looked back out at the highway, at the heat rising off the asphalt, at the sky above Atlanta, wide and blue and indifferent. And then, so small it would only register later on the body cam footage, frame by frame, the corner of Desmond Arledge's mouth moved. Not a smile. Not satisfaction. Something closer to recognition. Yet he already knew exactly how this ended. Desmond Arledge Preston Hale had done this 47 times. Not the same stop, not the same road, the same car, the same face, but the same sequence, the same internal logic that began with a look and ended with him standing at someone's window asking questions that had nothing to do with the reason he'd activated his lights. He did not think of it as a pattern. He thought of it as instinct. In 12 years on the force, Hale had built a working theory of the road that he never wrote down and never said out loud, but lived by completely. That certain vehicles, certain drivers, certain combinations of neighborhood and speed and lane and time of day added up to something worth checking. He had never been trained to think this way. No supervisor had explicitly told him to, but no supervisor had explicitly told him not to either. And the 2 times he had filed discretionary stops that generated complaints, once on a 23-year-old college student in a leased Audi near Buckhead, once on a 40-year-old contractor driving a company van on Cascade Road, both complaints had been reviewed, assessed, and closed. Inconclusive, the first report read. Officer used standard discretionary enforcement within acceptable parameters, read the second. That was all Hale needed to understand, that the line was wherever he stood. The reports from both stops noted the same language he'd used today. Improper lane transition. The phrase had never been challenged. It was elastic enough to survive review and specific enough to sound like cause. Nobody had connected the stops. Nobody had pulled them into the same file. Nobody had laid them side by side on a table and read them as a series rather than as isolated incidents. That was the thing about patterns. They didn't announce themselves. They accumulated. Quietly, slowly. One inconclusive report at a time. Back at his cruiser now, Hale looked at the name on the license again. Dominic K. Arledge. He ran it a second time. Nothing. Clean record. No priors. Vehicle registration matched. No flags. He looked at the Urus sitting on the shoulder. Candy apple red, matte black rims, the kind of car that costs more than a good detective's annual salary. He looked at the man standing at the hood. Relaxed. Still. Hands loose. Too relaxed, Hale thought, and he had a theory about that too. In his experience, people who stayed that calm during a stop were either hiding nothing or hiding something so deep it didn't register on the surface. He had always believed it was the latter. He picked up his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 41. I've got a subject detained on I-285 southbound at mile marker 19, requesting K-9 assistance for a vehicle sweep. A pause on the line. Unit 41, do you have probable cause for the request? Hale's jaw tightened. Subject refused consent to search. Vehicle fits the profile of recent corridor activity. Requesting K-9 as precautionary measure. Another pause. Longer. Copy. Unit 41. K-9 Unit 7 is available. Routing now. ETA, approximately 12 minutes. Hale set the radio down. 12 minutes. He stepped out of the cruiser and walked back toward the Urus. The younger officer, Caldwell. To 2 years on the job, was still standing near the rear bumper. His arms were crossed. His eyes moved between Hale and Dominic with an expression Hale couldn't quite read. "K9 is coming," Hale told him, low. Caldwell said nothing for a moment. Then, "What's the cause?" Hale looked at him. "Refused consent," Hale said. "That's enough." It wasn't. And somewhere in the younger officer's silence, in the way his eyes moved back to Dominic and stayed there, Hale may have understood that. But he let the moment pass the way he always let moments like that pass, by moving forward. He walked to the front of the Urus and stopped a few feet from Dominic. "We're going to wait for the K9 unit," Hale said. Dominic looked at him. "On what grounds?" "Precautionary." "I declined a search," Dominic said. "You have no probable cause for a dog sweep." "I'll determine that," Hale said. Dominic held his gaze for one steady beat. Then he looked away, back at the highway, and back at the open Georgia sky. He did not argue. He did not escalate. He reached slowly into his pocket. One hand, visible, telegraphed, and produced his personal cell phone. He turned on the screen. He pressed record. Hale's eyes tracked the phone. His jaw shifted. Dominic said nothing. He simply held the phone at his side, lens forward, capturing the scene in real time. Officer Caldwell, near the rear bumper, watched this and looked down at his own boots. 14 minutes had now passed since the stop began, and somewhere on the service road half a mile south, a white K9 unit vehicle was turning off the exit ramp. Desmond Arledge. The K9 unit arrived at 2:47 in the afternoon. The white vehicle rolled to a stop behind Hale's cruiser, and Officer Marcus Webb climbed out. K9 handler, 9 years on the unit. A man who moved with the kind of precision that came from working alongside an animal that had no tolerance for uncertainty. When he approached Hale near the cruiser first, they spoke in low voices for 40 seconds. Dominic couldn't hear the words, but he watched the body language. Watched Webb's posture shift slightly as Hale spoke. Watched his chin come down. Watched his eyes move over Hale's shoulder toward the Urus, once, then twice. Webb looked at Dominic. Dominic looked back. Neither man dropped his eyes. Webb turned back to Hale and said something short. Hale responded. Another exchange. And then Webb walked back to his vehicle, opened the rear door, and stood there with his hand on the latch. He didn't pull the dog out immediately. He stood there for 7 seconds, long enough that Hale noticed and turned to look at him, and then he deployed the animal. The dog was a Belgian Malinois, 70 pounds of trained muscle and controlled energy. Its name was Ranger. Webb walked it forward on a short lead. Dana and Dominic watched the animal approach the Urus with the steady professional attention of something that had no agenda other than the one it was built for. The dog swept the perimeter of the vehicle, front passenger side, around the hood, driver's side, along the rear. Its nose worked the seams and the wheel wells and the low edge of the doors in a rhythm that was almost mechanical. Webb moved with it, quiet, hands loose on the lead. He reading the animal the way only someone who trusted it completely could read it. The dog circled back around to the driver's side rear quarter panel and stopped. Dominic felt something cold move through his chest. Not fear, not guilt. Something older than both. The knowledge that in this country, on this road, standing outside this car, it did not matter that there was nothing to find. What mattered was whether the next 60 seconds went the way of the law or the way of something else entirely. He kept his breathing even, kept his hands still. Webb watched the dog. The dog's behavior was clean. No alert, no change in the ear position, no independent shift in the nose that would signal a hit. It had found the rear quarter panel mildly interesting in the way that busy road surfaces often produced residual odors, but there was nothing driving it forward. Nothing here. Nate Webb straightened. He looked at Hale. Hale was watching the dog with the focused attention of a man who needed a specific outcome and was waiting for the world to provide it. Webb gave the dog one more pass, front to back on the passenger side, around the rear bumper, back to Webb's left side. Then he stepped the animal away and stood with one hand on the dog's flank. No alert, no indication. Clean. Hale's jaw worked. Officer Caldwell, still near the bumper, had not moved in 12 minutes. His arms had uncrossed, his hands hung at his sides, and he was looking at his own feet in a way that suggested he was having a very specific internal conversation with himself. Dominic stood at the hood of his Urus and said nothing. 26 minutes had passed since the lights first came on in his rearview mirror. He had been standing on a Georgia highway shoulder in the afternoon heat for 26 minutes. He had been questioned without cause, detained without justification. Subjected to a dog sweep he had clearly and legally declined. His vehicle had been held while other cars blew past at 70 miles per hour. He had produced his documents. He had answered what he was required to answer. He had refused what he was legally permitted to refuse. He had recorded the encounter on his phone from the moment the K9 was requested. He had not raised his voice. He had not stepped beyond the boundaries Hale had drawn. He had been, in every measurable way, fully compliant. And fully aware. Webb walked Ranger back to the vehicle. He loaded the dog with the practiced efficiency of a man ready to close a chapter and drive away. He did not make eye contact with Hale as he secured the rear door, but before he climbed into the driver's seat, he paused. His hand was on the door handle. He was facing away from Hale and facing the open highway and the wide Atlanta afternoon. He stood there for 3 seconds. So then he got in and sat with both hands on the wheel without starting the engine, like he was deciding something. Hale turned back toward Dominic. His expression was controlled, the tight, professional neutrality of a man recalibrating in real time. He held his pen above the small notepad he'd pulled from his breast pocket. "I'm going to log this stop as preventative enforcement," Hale said evenly. "You're free to go." Dominic looked at him for a long moment. "Badge number," Dominic said. See, Hale blinked. "Once." "What?" "Your badge number," Dominic said again. Same tone, same calm, no performance, just the words, sitting there, perfectly still. Hale looked at him, and for the first time since the stop began, something moved behind his eyes that was not calculation, or authority, or certainty. He recited the number. Dominic repeated it aloud, slowly, making sure the phone in his hand caught every digit. Then he looked at Hale one last time, a look that contained no triumph, no anger, no grievance worn on the surface, and turned toward the driver's door of the Urus. He got in. He started the engine. The Lamborghini rumbled to life beneath him, deep, precise, controlled, and he pulled forward off the shoulder and merged cleanly into traffic on I-285. He did not look back. In his rearview mirror, Officer Preston Hale stood at the shoulder of the highway, watching the red Urus disappear into the Atlanta afternoon. And he smiled. So the kind of smile that lives in a man who believes he has just handled something successfully. The kind of smile that belongs to someone who has finished something. He pulled out his notepad and wrote 2 words at the top of the stop report. Preventative enforcement. Case closed. Desmond Arledge. The paperwork took 11 minutes. Hale sat in his cruiser with the engine running and the air conditioning on and filled out the stop report with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this before. Not this exact stop. Not this exact driver. This exact vehicle. This exact amount of time on a Georgia roadside. But this shape of stop. This architecture. He wrote improper lane transition in the reason field. He wrote no violations found in the outcome field. He wrote subject cooperative in the behavior field. Then, see in the discretionary notes section, the field that supervisors read last and approved fastest, he wrote the phrase he had written before. The phrase that had survived 2 reviews, 2 complaints, 2 rounds of departmental scrutiny without a single edit. Preventative enforcement. No further action required. He filed it electronically from the cruiser. Hit submit. Watched the confirmation number populate in the top right corner of the screen. Done. So he pulled out of the shoulder and back onto I-285 headed north, the afternoon settling around him like something that had already been resolved. Officer Caldwell had left 6 minutes earlier. He had walked to his cruiser without speaking to Hale again. He had sat in the car for nearly 2 minutes before starting the engine, long enough that Hale had noticed and said nothing. And then he had pulled away. Hale hadn't thought much about it. He was thinking about the Urus. What about the name on the license? About the way the man had stood at the hood of that car without flinching for 26 minutes in Georgia heat, and looked at him like he was waiting for something to be confirmed, rather than something to be decided. He'd seen that before, too. The ones who knew their rights, who recorded the stop, who asked for badge numbers with the calm of someone who had the number memorized before they even asked. He'd seen that posture, that stillness, and he had never once been bothered by it. The dog hadn't alerted. That happened. The dog not alerting didn't mean there was nothing there. It meant the search was inconclusive. That was a different thing. Hale understood the distinction the way he understood most distinctions, as something that served him when he needed it too. The car was clean. The man was free. The report was filed. That was the whole story. So he turned north on 285 and let the city open up around him, the skyline glinting in the afternoon light, the overpasses stacked like concrete arguments, Atlanta humming its own loud frequency beneath the summer sky. He thought, handled. He thought, done. He thought, next. He did not think about the body cam footage. He did not think about the timestamp on the K9 request versus the timestamp on the stop initiation. He did not think about the dash cam. So he did not think about the personal phone Desmond Arledge had been holding at his side from the moment the dog arrived. He did not think about Officer Webb sitting in the K9 unit for 90 seconds before driving away. He did not think about Caldwell. He thought about dinner, about the end of the shift, about the particular satisfaction of a day that had produced nothing but also cost him nothing. That was the math Hale had always run. 0 in the loss column. The wins took care of themselves. And he reached his next patrol zone at 3:09 p.m. and logged his location. 47 miles away, Desmond Arledge parked the Urus in a city garage 2 blocks from City Hall and sat in the car for exactly 3 minutes. Not thinking, not planning, just sitting inside the quiet luxury of that interior, the cool air, the soft leather, the precise hum of a machine built for control, letting the afternoon settle. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small card. Then he looked at the name printed on it, his own name. Beneath it, Chief of Police, City of Atlanta. Effective date, pending public announcement. He put the card back. He got out of the car, straightened his jacket, walked toward the elevator. He had a meeting to get to. The stop would be filed. The report would sit. The footage would exist. Somewhere in the cloud-based archive of the department's body camera system, it time-stamped and indexed and waiting with the patience that digital records have, which is to say, infinite patience. Everything that had happened on that shoulder of I-285 was already evidence. Desmond Arledge knew this. Preston Hale did not. When 6 weeks from this afternoon, on a Thursday morning that would begin like any other Thursday, an internal affairs supervisor named Rhonda Celestine would open a federal audit request on her desk and see 47 discretionary stops flagged for review. One of them would have a name on it that made her stop. Read it twice, then reach for her phone. Desmond Arledge. 47 folders landed on the desk of Internal Affairs investigator Rhonda Celestine at exactly 8:14 on a Tuesday morning. And she didn't look up from the first one for 3 hours. The federal audit request had come in quietly. No press release, no department-wide announcement, just a 2-page memo, a case number, and a mandate that made her stomach tighten the moment she read it. A full review of discretionary traffic stops across a 30-month window. Stops made without a verified moving violation. Stops where the reason given didn't quite match what the dash cam showed. Stops that had been logged, filed, and forgotten. 47 of them. She started sorting by date, then by officer name. And somewhere around the 12th file, a name appeared for the second time. Then a third. Preston Hale. Rhonda didn't react, not outwardly. She just pulled his files into their own stack and kept moving. That was how she worked. Methodical, quiet, relentless. She'd spent 11 years reviewing cases that the department had buried under paperwork and procedure. She knew what a pattern looked like before anyone else was willing to call it one. Hale's stop logs read clean on the surface. Professional language, correct formatting, boxes checked in the right order. But Rhonda had learned a long time ago that clean paperwork was sometimes the most suspicious thing in a file. Real stops were messy. Real officers made small inconsistencies, little typos, moments where the human being behind the badge showed through the bureaucratic language. Hale's files were too clean. She cross-referenced the first stop with dashcam footage, then the second. On the third, she paused. The time logged in the written report was 2:47 p.m. The dashcam timestamp read 2:31 p.m. 16 minutes. Not a rounding error, not a data glitch. She flagged it in red. She pulled the sixth file. Another gap. Smaller. 9 minutes. But there. She pulled the ninth file. 11 minutes. The pattern was not random. So the timestamps on the written reports were consistently later than what the cameras showed. Later by just enough to create a window. Just enough time to make certain interactions disappear from the official record. Rhonda leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she reached for her phone and called the one number she wasn't supposed to call unless something had crossed a very specific line. Deputy Commissioner Marcus Thibodeau picked up on the second ring. Upon she didn't offer a greeting, she said, "I need you to look at something before this gets any further." 20 minutes later, he was standing behind her chair, reading over her shoulder in silence. The room was quiet enough to hear the building's HVAC system humming 3 floors above them. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. "How many stops have the discrepancy?" Rhonda clicked through the flagged files on her screen. "Confirmed so far? 11. See, potentially as many as 19 if the pattern holds through the remaining files." Thibodeau straightened up. He didn't say anything for a moment that stretched long enough to feel like a decision being made in real time. "Finish the review," he said finally. "Don't share the findings with anyone in Hale's chain of command. When you're done, it comes directly to me." She nodded once. He walked out. Rhonda turned back to her screen, opened the next file, and found the 14th discrepancy waiting for her like it had been sitting there all along. Patient. Still. Impossible to explain away. She flagged it in red and kept going. 3 floors up and 2 departments over. In a corridor most officers only entered when they were being recognized or being disciplined. A department memo had been circulating for 4 days. Standard distribution list. New leadership structure. Transition timeline. Preliminary reform priorities. But at the bottom of page 2, in plain black type, was a name. Desmond Arledge. Incoming Chief of Police. Effective the 1st of the coming month. Most officers had skimmed past it. A new chief was a new chief. There would be adjustments, policy reviews, a period of posturing and positioning. But one officer in the 3rd-floor break room read that name twice, then read it a 3rd time. Preston Hale set down his coffee cup with a steadiness that didn't match what was happening behind his eyes. But he stared at the paper for another 4 seconds. Then he folded it neatly, placed it back on the table, and walked out of the room without finishing his coffee. Back at his desk, he opened his computer, navigated to the department's internal records portal, typed in his own badge number. He requested access to his own body cam archive from 6 weeks prior. The system logged the request at 11:42 a.m. By 11:43, what it had been automatically flagged for review because that specific footage was now part of an open internal investigation. Hale didn't know that yet. He was still waiting for the file to load. Desmond Arledge. The swearing-in was not a spectacle. That was the first thing the room noticed. No brass band, no red carpet. No 5-minute standing ovation choreographed for cameras. The ceremony took place in the department's main assembly hall on a Wednesday morning, and it was over in 22 minutes. Desmond Arledge stood at the front of the room in a charcoal suit. Not a uniform, not yet. Right hand raised, voice steady, eyes level. He took the oath the same way he had taken every consequential moment of his adult life. Quietly, completely. The room applauded. The media coverage that followed focused almost entirely on his reform agenda. Civilian oversight expansion, body cam policy restructuring, to mandatory bias documentation in all discretionary stop reports. Reporters framed it as a historic appointment. Analysts called it a turning point. 3 national outlets ran pieces about the shift in state-level oversight culture that had produced a leader like Desmond Arledge. None of them mentioned I-285. None of them mentioned a red Lamborghini Urus on a clear afternoon 6 weeks earlier. None of them knew. But inside the department, something had already started moving beneath the surface. Quiet and steady and unstoppable. The way groundwater moves before anyone above it understands what is coming. Officers had started watching footage. Not because anyone told them to. Not because there was a mandate or a memo or a directive posted in the break room. They watched because word travels in police departments the way it travels in any closed institution. Sideways, in lowered voices, or through the kind of knowing look exchanged between 2 people who have both read the same document and understood its full weight. Someone had cross-referenced the new chief's name against the stop log database out of simple curiosity. Someone else had pulled the dashcam archive from that afternoon on I-285 and watched the full 43 minutes. By the time the swearing-in ceremony ended, at least 9 officers across 3 shifts had seen the footage. None of them said anything out loud. But the shift in the room was real. The kind of shift you feel before you can name it. A recalibration of who holds power and what that power actually means. A quiet recognition that the man standing at the front of the assembly hall had once sat in a luxury SUV on the side of a highway and been treated like a suspect, and had said nothing, and had waited, and had let the process do what processes eventually do when someone is watching closely enough. Dominic delivered his remarks in 9 minutes. He spoke about accountability without using the word as a weapon. He spoke about trust without pretending it was simple. He spoke about the department he intended to lead, not the one he was inheriting. When it was over, he shook hands with the deputy commissioner, nodded to the assembled officers, and walked out of the assembly hall the same way he had driven away from that highway shoulder 6 weeks earlier. Calmly, without looking back. 3 hours after the ceremony, Preston Hale arrived at the records office on the 2nd floor. He had printed his own request form, filled it out by hand, and presented it to the clerk with the same practiced professionalism he used for everything. He asked again for his body cam footage from the date in question. The clerk looked at her screen, looked at him, looked at her screen again. "I'm sorry, Officer Hale. That footage is currently restricted pending an internal review. I can't release it without authorization from the investigating unit." Hale kept his expression exactly where it was. "What investigating unit?" he asked. The clerk's answer was 5 words. 5 words that rearranged everything Hale thought he knew about where he stood. He walked back to his desk, sat down, and for the first time in his career, Preston Hale understood what it felt like to be the subject of a process he could not control, could not redirect, and could not stop. The wait had begun, and it felt nothing like patience. Desmond Arledge. The second audit began without a press release, without a department-wide announcement, and without any of the procedural theater that usually accompanied major internal investigations. It began with a single email, sent at 6:47 a.m. from Rhonda Celestine's department account to Deputy Commissioner Marcus Thibodeau and 2 members of the Civilian Oversight Board. The subject line read, "Amended Findings, Discretionary Stop Review." The body of the email was 4 sentences long. The attachment was 61 pages. By 9 a.m., 3 people had read every word. By 10:30, the investigation had been formally elevated beyond the retraining review track. The first audit had been about bias, possible bias. It documented patterns that could be interpreted as evidence of racially motivated targeting, the kind of finding that historically resulted in mandatory retraining, a note in the personnel file, and an unofficial understanding that the officer in question was being watched. Uncomfortable, but survivable. Departments had absorbed far worse and kept moving. The second audit was not about bias. The second audit was about falsification. Rhonda had confirmed 19 separate instances across Hale's stop-log archive where the timestamps recorded in his written reports did not match the timestamps embedded in the corresponding dashcam and bodycam footage. The discrepancies ranged from 8 minutes to 23 minutes. In 14 of the 19 instances, the gap occurred during a period in which body microphone activity was also logged, meaning Hale had been speaking, moving, and interacting during those missing minutes in ways that the written report did not reflect. The question was no longer whether Hale had targeted drivers without legal justification. The question was what he had done during those gaps, why he had recorded different times, and whether the documentation had been altered deliberately to conceal specific interactions. Forensic analysis of the department's records system confirmed it within 48 hours. The timestamps had not been corrupted by a software glitch. They had been manually overwritten after the reports were initially generated. The system log, a secondary audit trail that most officers didn't know existed and that Hale had apparently never considered, preserved every edit made to every document filed in the department's records portal. Each of Hale's amended timestamps had a corresponding edit log entry, a date, a time, and a user credential, his badge number. The Civilian Oversight Board convened an emergency session on a Thursday afternoon in a conference room on the 4th floor. Desmond Arledge was not present for that meeting. His name appeared in the materials, but his role in the proceedings was incidental. He was a data point, not a complainant. He had never formally filed a complaint about the stop on I-285. He had never called the department. He had never spoken to a reporter about that afternoon. He had simply driven away. The Oversight Board voted 4-1 to refer the matter to the State Law Enforcement Certification Board. That referral carried weight that no internal disciplinary process could match. Decertification wasn't a demotion. It wasn't a suspension. It was the permanent revocation of an officer's legal authority to serve in law enforcement anywhere in the state. It was the end. Hale was placed on administrative leave at 4:15 p.m. that same Thursday. He was notified by phone. His supervisor read from a prepared statement. Hale listened without interrupting. When the call ended, he sat in the parking lot of a gas station 3 miles from the precinct and stared through his windshield at nothing in particular. His union rep called 12 minutes later. Hale let it go to voicemail. The certification board had been formally notified. And somewhere in the department he had worked in for 9 years, a 61-page report was being copied, reviewed, and then forwarded to people whose names Preston Hale had never once considered learning. Desmond Arledge. The suspension was made official on a Monday. No ceremony, no press conference. The department issued a single-paragraph statement confirming that Officer Preston Hale had been placed on unpaid suspension pending the outcome of a certification review initiated by the State Law Enforcement Oversight Board. The statement used the words documentation irregularities. It named no victims. And it offered no further detail. It didn't need to. Every officer in the department read it before noon. The union filed its challenge on Tuesday. It was the kind of challenge that usually worked. Procedural arguments about the integrity of the record system audit, questions about chain of custody for the digital evidence, a formal objection to the timeline of the investigation. The union's attorney had navigated similar processes before and had won 3 of the last 4 cases in which she'd been retained. This time was different. The forensic evidence was not a matter of interpretation. There were no gray areas in the edit log. There were no competing timestamps to weigh against each other. There was a record, and the record said what it said. And the record had been preserved in a system that no one, not the union, not its attorney, not any procedural argument drafted at 11 p.m., could credibly challenge. The union's formal challenge was denied within 72 hours. Hale cleared out his locker on a Wednesday afternoon. One of the facility's staff unlocked the locker room for him and then stepped outside to give him privacy. He packed a gym bag, a framed photo from his first year on the job, a pair of spare boots he'd kept for night shifts, a coffee mug he'd never washed. He did it in under 10 minutes. And no one in the precinct saw him leave. The department didn't wait for the certification board's final ruling before beginning its internal restructuring. Chief Arledge had requested a full policy audit of discretionary stop documentation procedures within his first week in office. Before the second audit was complete, before the suspension, before the union challenge. The request had been framed as routine reform work tied to the broader oversight transition. And nothing about it publicly pointed to Hale. But the policy changes that emerged from that audit were precise in ways that only made sense if you understood exactly where the system had failed. Every discretionary stop report now required dual timestamp verification, one from the officer's written submission and one pulled automatically from the body cam system at the time of filing. Any discrepancy between the two would flag the report for immediate supervisory review before it entered the permanent record. The window for manual editing of submitted reports was reduced from 72 hours to 0. Once submitted, a report was locked. Every officer in the department received the updated policy documentation in writing. They signed for it. And then, on a Friday morning, a training bulletin was distributed department-wide. It referenced a specific stop, the stop on I-285, without naming either party involved. It used the stop as a case study in documentation integrity, legal boundaries of consent-based searches, and the evidentiary weight of dashcam timestamps. It was 3 pages long, clear, direct, written in the kind of plain language that made it impossible to misread or misremember. Officers read it at their desks, in break rooms, in their patrol cars before shift. Some of them read it twice. A few of them pulled up the original footage on the department's internal archive and watched the full 43 minutes. The polite refusal of consent, the K-9 request, the long wait, the dog that found nothing, the forced courtesy of the release. and understood for the first time what they were actually looking at. Not just a stop, a record. Patient, documented, and permanent from the moment it happened. Desmond Arledge. 3 weeks after the training bulletin, and on a Thursday morning on the south side of Atlanta, a patrol officer named Darius Kellum made a traffic stop. The vehicle was a black pickup truck. The driver had drifted slightly across the center line at a four-way intersection. A genuine infraction, visible and documented on dashcam before the lights went on. Kellum had been on the job for 2 years. He had read the bulletin. He had watched the footage. He walked up to the driver's window with his body camera recording, his voice measured, and his questions limited to what was directly relevant to the stop. When the driver produced a license and registration, Kellum reviewed them, returned to his vehicle, ran the plates, and came back 2 minutes later. He issued a verbal warning. He told the driver to have a good morning. He walked back to his patrol car. No requests for consent. No extended detention. No call for backup. No reason to do any of those things. Because none of those things were justified by a minor lane drift at an empty intersection on a quiet Thursday morning. And Kellum knew, in a way that had not been as clear to him 6 months earlier, exactly where the line was and why it mattered that he stay on the correct side of it. He sat in his patrol car for a moment after the truck drove away. The dash cam was still running. The body cam was still recording. He filled out his stop report in real time, with the timestamps matching exactly. Oh, the way they were supposed to. Then he pulled back into traffic and kept working. Desmond Arledge drove himself to the department that morning. He drove the same red SUV, the same highway, the same stretch of I-285, where, 11 weeks earlier, he had sat in the heat of a Tuesday afternoon and waited while a man who believed that control was the same thing as authority ran through every tactic available to him and found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Dick Dominic had known that before the lights ever appeared in his rearview mirror. He had known it during the entire 43 minutes. He had known it when he drove away. Some people mistake silence for acceptance. Some people mistake calm for weakness. Some people look at a man who refuses to match their energy, who declines their requests without raising his voice, who documents everything without announcing that he is documenting, and they decide they have won. They haven't won. And they've just given themselves more time to believe they have. Preston Hale's certification hearing was scheduled for the following month. His attorney had filed 2 motions to delay. Both had been denied. The outcome was not yet official, but the record was what it was, and records do not change because the person they describe finds them inconvenient. Dominic arrived at the precinct at 7:30 a.m. He parked in the designated space that had been assigned to his title. Then he walked through the front entrance. He nodded to the desk sergeant. He went to work. Because accountability is not always loud, it does not always arrive in the form of a confrontation or a viral moment or a speech delivered at the moment of someone's humiliation. Sometimes it arrives in a Tuesday morning memo. Sometimes it arrives in a revised policy document that officers sign without fully understanding why it was written. And sometimes it arrives in a forensic audit trail that a record system quietly preserved for months before anyone thought to look. The man who believed he had won filed a report and called it done. The man who actually won was already sitting behind a desk making decisions that would shape the department for the next decade. Delayed accountability is still accountability. It always arrives. It always does. And if this story moved you, if you felt something watching a man handle pressure with precision instead of panic, watching a system finally bend toward truth instead of protecting the people who distorted it, then you are exactly the kind of person this channel was built for. Stories like this one exist because people like you choose to show up for them. Hit subscribe. Turn on the notifications. Because the next story on this channel is the kind that will make you stop whatever you are doing and lean in. And you do not want to miss it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share what this story meant to you. Tell someone else about it. Your voice in the comments is not just engagement. It is proof that stories about accountability, dignity, and truth still matter to people who refuse to look away. The next chapter is coming. Be here for it.